If it seems too good to be true, it is.
The deals that went sideways.
I've had businesses where I had to fire all of the owners post-transaction because they all wanted to kill each other, stabbing each other's backs.
Founders at war.
I found myself on a plane every week convincing someone not to quit.
The hidden tax of scale.
You know, I've had a guy that we bought at a huge purchase price who started his own company after we closed with one of his key guys. He made sure the guy didn't sign a non-compete. He secretly funded the business and became our main competitor and took that business we acquired effectively down to zero.
If trust breaks, everything breaks.
So you got to be careful not to kind of believe their bullshit.
That's good advice. Kory learned that the hard way, but I'm getting ahead of myself, so we'll start at the beginning. In this episode of Moneywise, Kory Mitchell is going to show you what growing through acquisition actually looks like. Not the glossy LinkedIn version, but the messy reality of buying blue-collar businesses, managing founders who've already made their money, and nearly losing everything through a $200 million exit. Even if you're never planning on doing M&A yourself, this is for anyone building something that they want to scale and eventually sell, because the lessons here about integration, about culture, people over numbers, those matter whether you're buying a business or running one. My name is Harry Morton, and this is Moneywise. This is not a podcast about starting up. It's about what comes next. The money, the strategy, the identity crises that happen along the way. It's made for the community of founders over at Hampton. We'll talk more about it in a little bit, but if you're curious now and you're a founder doing at least $3 million in annual revenue, check it out at joinhampton.com. Kory Mitchell grew up taking asbestos out of schools and hospitals in small town Iowa. Unglamorous, blue-collar work where cash was king and debt was risky. But it was profitable and it was overlooked.
You know, you talk about a blue-collar business. It literally, we took asbestos out of schools and hospitals. There's incredible businesses out there and bizarre things like asbestos abatement that you'd never think could be a good business.
Yeah,
but, you know, I have a really nice house that asbestos built.
For 3 decades, it ran exactly like that. Conservative, cash-focused, and a really good living for his family.
I grew up in this very conservative family business where, you know, it was all about preserving cash, not taking on risk. It was a fantastic lifestyle business. It didn't really grow for a long time. It was $7, $8, $9 million for many, many years, but it always threw off a couple $1 million in cash. So you imagine you're in a small town in the middle of the country, a couple $1 million lifestyle business is an unbelievable lifestyle business for my family. And so it had just grown really, really slowly, organically. And my brother and I bought the business now 20 years ago.
It was working. Low risk, high margin, millions in cash every year, but they wanted to grow. And in 2015, they were finally willing to take on what they'd always avoided, debt. Tens of millions of it, actually.
We knew there were a whole bunch of adjacent services we could offer. And so the model we started building out was, okay, let's maybe buy a small business in one of the towns where we want to work and then add service lines to it. That became the model.
And so what was that urge to then go, okay, we're growing organically. Presumably, well, you tell me, like you kind of saw promise in it. You saw, okay, like we're doing well here already. We should really go super hard at that. But like given your kind of slightly conservative nature, what was it that made you just decide, hey, screw it, we're gonna go for this?
I always wanted to grow. I sort of had this innate desire to want to continue to grow the business. You know, you look back in hindsight and it was definitely a risky move. But at the time, we were sort of compelled to grow. We had a great team. We were building out this business development model. We had a lot of capacity to service these clients we were building out.
Yeah.
And, you know, the next natural move was for us to add geographies. Our industry is very like blue collar, so it doesn't have sales folks in general. So we were like the only ones that are out there with a business development team. We were buying little businesses originally in cash. You know, with whatever cash we made that year, we reinvest it and we bought a demolition business in Iowa. It was a $3 million revenue business. We added environmental service lines to it, gave that team confidence. We gave them a little bit of a balance sheet. And that business grew to 24 million organically over the next 3 years. The challenge that we had was cash. When you're doing it yourself, you're limited, and we were very risk averse. And so we didn't really want to take on debt. We were essentially funding it with our own capital. And that makes your growth just naturally much slower. We were buying some really small regional businesses, adding service lines and growing them organically from there for a few years. And we built the business to about, I think it was around 36 million in revenue. It was throwing off great cash. It's a nice high margin industry. The pivot for us, we found another business that was doing a similar thing in a different part of the country. They were adding small offices in small towns and in Texas and Louisiana. And so we merged our business with theirs.
The merger actually brought something more valuable than revenue, and that was it brought education. A small private equity backer taught them how to use leverage, how to think bigger, and how to actually scale. They merged at 36 million, and then doubled to 70 million, and then they did 3 more acquisitions, all on debt, and for the first time ever. And you said that, taking on that first debt was scary, and I imagine it was. You were like $70 million in debt, right? That's a lot, at least to me. So what were the internal conversations between you and your brother, between you and the senior leadership team that kind of made you comfortable with that?
What I didn't really understand, with something that I've learned a ton over the last several years, is there's this magical arbitrage that happens when you buy a smaller business at 5 or 6 times profit or EBITDA, and you grow it to a certain size and you can sell it for 10, 11, 12 times EBITDA. And so, this magical little thing happens when you get to a certain critical size. Every time you add a business for 5 times, it instantly turns overnight to being worth 10 times. And so we just had a tremendous education over those years of working with a more sophisticated team than we were. And it was an incredible learning experience, certainly for me. And it's part of what has inspired me to do some of the work I'm doing today with other blue collar founders.
Between 2017 and 2021, they did 5 acquisitions. Culture fit, safety record, financial performance, these were the main factors that they were looking at. The business spread across the mid-Atlantic, Texas, Louisiana, and the Midwest. But here's what Kory discovered about himself in the process.
I always was the business development guy of our business. I love talking to customers. I love the chase. I love winning clients and contracts. And I felt the same way about doing deals. It's building a relationship, convincing them that we should be the right partner for them. What I didn't love, and I think I realized about myself over time, as we got bigger and bigger and bigger, I didn't love running a business that big. It turned into a slog.
What about it specifically?
All the people problems. We had 35 or 37 offices or something like that. And our business is really relationship driven. So if you have a top founder that wants to leave the business, it can be really damaging to our company in terms of the revenue loss, because there are all these personalized relationships. It's a very, very small niche industry. So I found myself on a plane every week convincing someone not to quit.
Sure.
Which is a drag. You can't focus on the fun stuff of chasing deals and chasing clients, which is what I like doing.
If you've bought a business from a founder, they've made a bunch of money, they've done really well, and you want them to stick around and continue to operate that business as well as they have done in the past. But they're like, dude, I've made my money. I don't want to be here anymore. How do you incentivize people like that?
Super hard. I mean, first of all, we always want the founder to stay, almost always. They built this great business. They have the client relationships. Like you said, they know how to make it run profitably. And so our approach, and this is the approach of many, many private equity funds as well, is they typically have a rollover equity component of the deal, right? So you buy X percent of the business, 70, 80%, could be 60%. Sure. And they have a rollover component where they would roll equity into our holding company. So one, they're incentivized to help us grow for a future, bite at the apple, second bite at the apple. And 2, we throw an earnout on top. So you've got an earnout that says, hey, if you can continue to grow at X percent, 10%, 15%, whatever it is, there's a meaningful additional cash compensation over the next 2-3 years. But to your point, I mean, these guys often have made money for 20, 30 years.
Sure.
So they might be sitting on $30, $40 million in their bank account, and they don't need us very badly.
Sure.
And so managing people like that is incredibly complicated. You know, we were extremely fortunate to bring in really high quality businesses with great people. And almost everyone is still in the business today, amazingly. Now, fast forward several years later. But it's tough. You know, you've got to convince them that our culture is like their culture. You've got to convince them that they can still have meaning and value working with us. So it's one of the harder things that you can do when you're buying businesses of people that have made a lot of money.
Any like M&A cautionary tales from your experience? Any kind of like near misses or, things like that?
One thing I would say is, I've done some doozies. We bought some businesses that if it seems too good to be true, it is. There's never a deal that's too good to be true. Usually if you get a valuation that is just like, wow, I just can't believe we're buying this business for this price. There's always a story. I've had businesses where I had to fire all of the owners post-transaction because they all wanted to kill each other. They all were, stabbing each other's backs. I've had a guy that we bought at a huge purchase price, who started his own company after we closed with one of his key guys. He made sure the guy didn't sign a non-compete. He secretly funded the business and became our main competitor and took that business we acquired effectively down to zero.
So how do you avoid buying a disaster?
I think one of the biggest mistakes that private equity does today is they come in and buy companies without diligencing the people, right? They come in and they'll do all kinds of risk analysis on the financials, the legal, but they don't go visit the people.
Talk to me about trust. Like, how do you build trust during the process? How do you trust the founder? Because again, like you're there in Denver, they've got an office in Dallas or whatever. How do you build that trust and maintain that trust?
The first thing I do with any prospect is go and have a meal together. I always like to have a meal before we do a business meeting so that you can, really connect on the human level to figure out, what they really value and stand for, things they care about. And if they really are worried about their team and their customers and things like that, it's usually a really good sign. It's got to be in person. You need to spend real time with them. For us, like each of these deals was a big thing. We couldn't take it lightly because if we had a miss, it hurt a lot.
Look, from the outside, this whole thing sounds incredible. Buy a bunch of businesses, build a portfolio, hold them long term. But the reality, 2-3 years in, you're on a plane every week convincing someone not to quit. There's always a cost.
There were a lot of parts of it that were really, really tough. I'm sure it's so different by industry because our industry was so personality dependent. You had these regional folks that had awesome relationships and they were sort of the business. So it's really hard to transition that to being our business over time. And it takes a lot of work and you need really, really good leadership, but it takes a ton of time and energy.
Yeah. So talk to me about integration. How does one successfully integrate a business? Where are the kind of common pitfalls that you've experienced there? And any words of wisdom on that front?
Yeah, look, integration is probably the hardest thing. What I'll tell you, by the way, is when we transacted, we were not a fully integrated business. We essentially were a group of guys that had regional companies, right? And literally on Friday, we would do a call and say, hey, how's business? It wasn't like there was no centralized ERP or CRM. These were essentially still unintegrated companies that were on different accounting platforms. And what I'll say is that hurt us on our valuation. There is no doubt about it. We probably would have gotten an additional 1 to 2 times EBITDA transaction had we been integrated.
Interesting.
And so post-transaction, that became like, mission number one. It's an enormous effort, and we had to bring in outside resources to help us. And it's just now, years later, just getting completed. It's definitely one of the things I would recommend to do early, because the bigger you get, the harder it is to undo all of the broken stuff that you inevitably have in your company. Mm-hmm. We were a business that we thought was pretty well run. We were just sort of making it up as we went. So, systems are huge, but also communication. One of the things I see people do now is they really fail at rolling out internal communication with their teams after they've bought businesses. What it hurts is building kind of a common unified culture of the company or the business, getting really good aligned, an aligned vision of where the company's headed. Even if it ends up wrong, you want people to know where you're headed. And you want everyone on the same page and, marching in the same direction. And then the other piece is aligned incentive programs. We had 12 different incentive plans across the country. And until we started putting everyone on the same program, it created a possibility for friction. You had, guys that talk to each other on a conference call and were paid in a completely different way. And you want to have incentives where, when you win, they win.
Sure.
And so those are all like pieces that we had to start redoing. We were 1,300 or 1,400 people by the time we started kind of redoing a lot of those programs. And let me tell you, it's a lot harder to do it that way. So, I tell people all the time, you do it when you're still a really small business. I'm building out a business now, and I'm trying to put a big boy ERP in place now while we have 6 people. Because it's like, I know where we're headed. I'd rather start now.
Why is culture important, especially in a business like yours, when you're acquiring all these different companies that exist in their own right? And also, especially when you're sitting there in Denver and you're buying, another asbestos removal company in Dallas, why is that cohesive culture important? I'm really fascinated by that.
For us, we were trying to build a national brand and an identity of what the business is. And for us, it represented a lot of things. It was like integrity, high quality workmanship, safety, compliance. Our industry is one of those things where if you do it wrong, it's bad for a lot of people. So we were trying to build this image of ourselves as, the best in the industry and the national leader in the space. And in order to do that, you have to communicate the vision to your teams. And they also want to know, people are afraid. They're terrified of, hey, they watch TV and they see downsizing and they see cost-cutting measures and things like that. The reality is in most cases, when you buy a business, you're actually trying to grow it and you're adding people to it, not shrinking it. And so that messaging of who we are and where we're headed, it's super important to the team on having confidence that this is a place they want to be and they want to, run through walls for us. Building out a really good communication strategy internally is so important to, just to have a shared vision of where we're all headed together.
Let's talk about why this podcast exists at all. Conversations like this, where people that have built incredible companies are literally giving you their entire playbook, what worked and what didn't to build their business. These conversations are happening all of the time inside of Hampton. Hampton is a private, highly vetted community of founders and high net worth individuals. And there's stuff that you just hear only behind closed doors. Those closed doors, they're Hampton. If you want access, you can. If your business is doing 3 million in revenue or more annually, you should apply at joinhampton.com and get access to amazing people just like Kory. By the way, Hampton just launched a channel called Shit, I'm Fucked. That's exactly what it sounds like. It's a place where people are sharing all of the stuff that just went wrong inside their business. It's both entertaining, educational, and frankly, pretty cathartic. And it's fast becoming, or has already become, pretty much the most popular channel inside of the Slack community. Community is invaluable, and I recommend you check it out. Go to joinhampton.com to learn more. Talking of shit I'm fucked, let's find out what happened after Kory sold. By 2021, they had it all figured out. 5 successful acquisitions, 120 million in revenue, 21 million in EBITDA. They sold for 200 million, and Kory stepped away from the CEO role to be able to focus on what he really loved, which was chasing deals. Then everything went to hell. So you sold in 2021, but you didn't leave until 2024. So what happened in those 3 years?
A lot. I was planning on leaving the business probably 2 years post-close. And my plan was not to run the company. My plan was to really focus on organic and M&A growth, which is what I love doing. Still what I love doing today.
Yep.
So I didn't take the CEO role, and we brought in an outside CEO to run the business. And It did not go well. Really not well.
How not well?
Let me put some numbers in context for you. So when we transacted, we were about 21 million in EBITDA. We did a couple of transactions post-close, adding about 6 or so million in EBITDA. So took it to 27 with the new acquisitions. And 9 months later, we were at around 12 million in EBITDA. Now, when you're thinking about the purchase price plus the added debt for those new acquisitions, you're now running at a massive deficit. And so what went wrong? A couple of things. We brought in a CEO that was more of a hired gun from outside the industry, and he was used to doing really large industrial projects, and we weren't. We were a commercial business. And so he pursued 5 or 6 really large projects. Our business was lots of small, repeat and recurring customers, small at high margins. He said, well, we got to go after these multi-million-dollar projects, and that was sort of his background, was industrial. So he wanted us to pursue some large projects, which we did. We won them, and they were an unmitigated disaster. So these 5 or 6 projects were only about 20 million in revenue, but lost somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 million in net loss.
Wow. Okay, yeah. Let me put that in perspective. They took on $20 million worth of work and somehow managed to lose $12 million doing it. That's not just unprofitable, that's paying clients to let you work for them.
And on top of that, we way overhired. So, the idea is, okay, we're going to grow to a $450 million revenue business and 75 in EBITDA. So we need to be ready for it. Let's build this big management team.
Yep.
So we added $7 million roughly in overhead while also having massive losing projects. That math is really bad. And so 9 months into this tenure, he left the business and I took over as CEO. And we had to do a full turnaround of the company. So you go from having this business that's like kind of storybook, we were up and to the right for a long, long time, printing cash, have a great transaction, leader in the industry. In our business, we need to do bonding. So for like a large public projects, you have to bond the work. We lost our ability to do bonding. We were cash strapped. We had there was debt on the financials because of it was a PE backed deal, so they put some debt on the balance sheet. So now we're in lender covenant issues. So essentially, we had to go into crisis mode, and it was the hardest period of my entire working life by far. We couldn't do any transactions, of course. There's no way we could afford them. And what we did is not rocket science. All we did is get back to the basics. So we essentially got the bad projects off our books. We wrote down the losses. We cut a huge amount of that overhead. So we right-sized the overhead structure, and we just went back to the basics. The core businesses were doing great. Our leadership at all those businesses were doing well. They were going up and to the right. Organic growth was actually working really well because the business development team was cranking. Everything was going well under the surface. The only thing going really badly were these 5 or 6 large projects and added too much overhead. And so all we had to do was course correct. So we went back to the basics of what the business did. We focused on our core competencies and we cut overhead. And then you fast forward a year and a half, the time that I left the business, we had grown a bunch and our EBITDA was back up to like 30 million. So it was
wow.
And it's not some genius move. We just went back to what we did well, but it was hard. It was really, really, really hard. By the time I got to the winter of 2023, I was just fried. My physical health sucked. I was on the road all the time, stressed beyond belief. It just didn't feel well. And so honestly, I needed to leave the business in order to like regain my physical and mental well-being, because I was just like beat.
So 18 months later, how does it feel? Like, how does it feel to be out and done? And where are you at now?
It feels great. It's awesome. So first of all, I mean, I took a solid 6 months off. I have a now 7-year-old son. I'm 49. So I've got a 7-year-old son. At the time he was 6, my wife and I and our son kind of traveled the world together. We took our kid to like 14 countries, and I focused on my health and didn't drink for a year. Just like full clean out, eating well, not drinking, focused on my mental health, like all the good stuff you're supposed to do. It was like a full midlife crisis, like classic. I bought a Porsche. I did all the things you do, right? I'd never had a fancy car. I was like, you know what? Yeah. I'm now not pulling up to a job site so I can have a fancy car. So I bought a Porsche. I got in shape. I traveled the world, and then I started a new business, and I'm in like bootstrap mode, cranking up a new business now, and I'm having like the best time of my life.
Here's what happens when you spend 30 years building something. You don't know how to stop. Well, not really. Kory left the CEO role in early 2024. He took the sabbatical, did all the things that you're supposed to do after burning out. He took 6 months off, focused on his health, time with family, all that stuff. But if you're wired a certain way, which most of us founders are, eventually the rest starts to feel like the hard part. And it's time to rebuild. So talk to me about why start another business. What's the pullback to starting a new venture?
I'm a deal guy. Even all that time I took off, I was flying around the country looking at businesses to acquire. I started doing some board work on large specialty contractors where I'm working with young founders. And I really get a ton out of working with founders who know that they need coaching. I've been in a peer group for a long time. And like the guys, in fact, one of the guys in my group is the one that introduced me to this podcast. So for me, that coaching that you get from really smart people around you is one of the smartest things that I ever did years ago. And so now I feel like I can give back to younger founders, or not even necessarily younger founders, but also ones that maybe just haven't gone through what I've been through. You know, the process of doing M&A, but also transacting. So I'm now working with a whole bunch of founders in blue collar industry that want to put their business, they want to take it to market. And so I'm helping to coach them to know what good looks like and helping them sort of scale and build their businesses. But I'm also doing transaction advisory work, and it's fun. For me, it's the most fun part of what I used to do, and like chasing deals, chasing customers, except now I don't really have any risk. I'm doing it as like a mentor, and it's also, it can be a lucrative business. So it's the best of all worlds for me now.
When you're taking your 6 months off and you're still flying around the country looking at deals, like where are you finding these things? Because I think a lot of folks listening will be like, okay, I want to grow through acquisition. I'm really excited by this. I want to go find some debt and some backers. I want to go and buy some cool businesses. And they might be in their space and they're like, cool, I know, I can think of like 3 or 4 competitors. Makes total sense for me to kind of have that conversation. But outside of that, talk to me about sourcing.
This is maybe the secret sauce that I have. That's one of the things that I've learned to do well over time. And in fact, the idea for this business for me started with, I'm sitting in a board meeting with a private equity guy who bought this company. And he said, Kory, every time we talk to you, you're meeting with some founder somewhere. He's like, how the hell are you finding all these deals? We would die to find deals like this. And I'm like, really? So I sort of figured out that connecting really good companies with really good buyers is actually a rare talent. And I didn't know that I had it. So, it's a combination of things. A lot of people in my universe connect me with founders, and they say, hey, you should really talk to Kory about, I know you've talked about where you want to take the business over the next couple of years. I know you've talked about selling. I know you're burned out, whatever it might be. So a lot of people get connected to me from friends that they trust. And so what I started doing is building out a national network of sort of spheres of influence, people that are in a relationship of trust with founders. And that's what I have now. As I build out our business, I spend the majority of my time talking with sources of influence who can connect me with really, really great founders and great businesses that want to take it to the next level.
I guess one more just question about the M&A thing. So if you, again, rewind to 2006, who shouldn't do the M&A thing? Who shouldn't chase that kind of growth by acquisition, do you think?
You want to make sure your own house is in order. You need to have a really stable company. I had a business call me once that their business was cratering, and they thought the solution was, let's go buy another company. And I'm like, dude, you're fixing to have a huge problem if you take on additional debt, thinking that your income statement is going to look better just by buying this other business. So you have to have a really firm foundation in your company. Great fundamentals, good systems, good management team, etc. So one, I would say it's really important that you've got your own house in order before you even think about bringing on another business, because you're going to end up spending a huge amount of time, especially if it's in another geography. You're going to spend a huge amount of time in person working through all the challenges of integrating this totally different business with founders with their own ideas. And that's just a ton of work. So that means you need to have someone on the home front that's going to keep your business running while you're spending a lot of energy on the road.
Right.
So yeah, I would say a key operational leader in your own business becomes key, or you need to outsource out the M&A function to a competent team so that you can keep running your business.
Most people think M&A is about numbers, multiples, EBITDA, leverage ratios. But Kory's story isn't really about that. It's about something that spreadsheets never show, which is people. The landfill owner, the construction guy, the scrap heap business. These are blue-collar millionaires that nobody's really talking about. And when you buy their business, you're not just buying their revenue, you're buying their identity, their relationships, their life's work. We've had another guest on recently who talks about these businesses. He calls them sweaty startups. Nick Huber, he's also built a massive empire on these kinds of businesses that nobody's really talking about either. And if you want to hear more, you can listen to that conversation with him by clicking here.